Who cooked my burger? My burger.
A place to relax and enjoy a good hearty meal.
To help you unwind.
Can I help you, Chef?
Remember the worst and best restaurants you grew up with, and how it felt walking through those doors? In the 1970s, restaurants were family treats, weekend rituals, and the backdrop to everyday life. But what if the places we loved weren't always as good as we remember? There was something about walking into a Pizza Hut in the 1970s that made you feel like you were part of something bigger than just a Friday night dinner. That red roof was not just a roof, it was a signal, a promise. A little beacon of pizza, Coca-Cola, and red plastic cups. You knew what to expect the moment you stepped inside. Warm lighting, deep red booths, that faint oregano smell, and a pizza pan sizzling just a few minutes away. The dine-in experience was king back then, and Pizza Hut knew how to deliver it. This was not a grab-your-slice-and-go situation. No, Pizza Hut in the 1970s wanted families to sit down, stay a while, and share a pitcher of soda while arguing about toppings. They had those stained glass chandeliers, checkered tablecloths, and arcade machines in the corner that made every child beg their parents for a few quarters more. It was not just food, it was an outing. And the pizza itself? Not fancy, not flashy, but dependable in a way that mattered. Crispy edges, gooey cheese, and thick slices you could fold but never needed to. Add to that the novelty of getting a personal pan pizza, and you were suddenly the most important person at the table. These red roof restaurants became miniature landmarks across America. They were where birthdays happened, where kids got their first taste of independence by ordering their own meal, and where every slice felt like a small celebration. The real trick? They made everyday moments feel special, and we kept going back because it felt good to be somewhere familiar. Somewhere that always had a seat, a server, and something bubbling in the oven. Now imagine this. It is the 1970s. You want steak, but your wallet says no. You still want to sit down somewhere nice, maybe even sip a drink that does not come in a paper cup. That is where Steak and Ale steps in. It was the middle ground between the high-end steakhouse and the diner down the street, and it found its audience fast. It was dinner without the tie. Steak and Ale had this whole Tudor-style thing going on, dark wood, candlelight, and a vibe that made you think, wow, maybe I should have dressed up a little. But no one judged you if you did not. That was the charm. You could order prime rib and still feel like you were just out for a relaxed evening. It balanced comfort with a touch of class, and in a time when chain restaurants were just starting to take over, that balance stood out. And let us talk about the salad bar. The salad bar was a revolution. You built your own plate, loaded it up with croutons, Thousand Island dressing, and a mountain of shredded cheese, because nobody was watching and nobody cared. The portions were generous, the prices were friendly, and you got real plates and silverware. Steak on a weekday? Suddenly not such a wild idea. It was more than a meal. It was a mood. You left feeling like you had gone out to a nice place, but without the bill to match. Steak and Ale was the place where parents went on date nights, co-workers met after hours, and teenagers had their first fancy dinner. A little upscale, a little down-to-earth, and somehow that mix just worked. Before there were apps and fast food at every exit, there was Howard Johnson's, and for a while, it was the place to pull over. Those orange roofs popped out along highways like candy corn, and families knew exactly what they were getting the second they saw one. For travelers in the 1970s, Howard Johnson's was more than just a pit stop. It was a place of comfort, consistency, and ice cream. 28 flavors. That was the magic number. Whether you were 7 or 70, the moment you saw that ice cream counter, your travel fatigue faded. It could be chocolate chip or butter brickle. There was always something waiting to lift your spirits. But Hojo's was not just about dessert. It had a full menu of solid, dependable American fare. Fried clams, hot dogs, grilled cheese sandwiches with that satisfying golden crust. Food that was not trying to impress you, just feed you well. Inside, it was bright, friendly, and always clean. The kind of place where you might hear, "How was the drive?" from your waitress before she even hands you a menu. And if your parents were exhausted from 5 hours of driving with 3 kids in the back seat, Hojo's was the reset button. This was the golden age for roadside America. Howard Johnson's was not just a restaurant. It was a cultural checkpoint, a piece of travel history. You went in knowing what to expect, and in a country where every mile looked a little different, that predictability mattered. Somewhere between the jukebox music, the warm pancakes, and the napkin dispensers, we found a little slice of home off the highway. If you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you either had a birthday at Shakey's Pizza or knew someone who did. This was not just another pizza place. It was a full-on experience. Walk in and you were met with the clatter of trays, the smell of garlic, and live banjo music that made you feel like you had wandered into a Western saloon. With pepperoni. Shakey's was loud, a little chaotic, and totally perfect for families. Communal tables meant you might be sitting next to someone you had never met before, and that was part of the fun. You shared space, laughter, and slices of that crispy, thin crust pizza that somehow always had the perfect crunch. Add in pitchers of root beer or beer depending on your age, and it was a celebration from start to finish. This was not date night pizza. This was messy, saucy, no-frills fun. You were not there to be quiet. You were there to have a good time. And if you were lucky, you might catch a glimpse of the kitchen through the glass, giant dough balls being tossed, toppings flying, ovens glowing. It was the kind of place that kids adored and parents tolerated. But deep down, everyone left full and happy. Because no matter how much sauce ended up on your shirt or how many quarters you spent at the arcade machine, it all added up to memories. Shakey's was not built for subtlety. It was built for joy, noise, and big tables filled with people who just wanted a slice and a good time. And in the 1970s, it nailed that mission like nobody else. Now let us cool things down a little and talk about Swenson's. Just saying the name might make you crave something sweet. Swenson's was not just an ice cream shop. It was an event. Bright colors, vintage vibes, and menus that looked more like storybooks than food listings. Every Sunday had a name, and every name came with a little magic. It was the place you went after Little League games, family dinners, or just because it was Tuesday and you wanted a treat. Swenson's had that old-fashioned charm, but never felt out of date. Maybe it was the way the whipped cream swirled just right, or the cherry perched perfectly on top. But whatever it was, it worked. Banana splits, hot fudge sundaes, ice cream sodas. They were not trying to be healthy. They were trying to be happy. And it showed. Each visit felt like a reward. A place where kids could feel like royalty for a few minutes, and adults could remember what it felt like to just enjoy dessert without guilt or green juice. And you better believe the staff leaned into the theme. Uniforms, big smiles, the whole 9 yards. It was not fast food. It was ice cream theater. Every scoop was a little show and everyone left smiling. There are fewer Swenson's around today, but their memory is still scooped into our minds. They were more than a sweet stop. They were a reason to leave the house. In a time when entertainment did not come from a screen in your pocket, Swenson's gave you a reason to look up, order something colorful, and just enjoy the moment. Farrell's was not quiet. In fact, it was deliberately loud. Sirens, drums, shouting waiters announcing someone's birthday like they had just won the lottery. It was sensory overload in the most delightful way. And kids loved every second of it. If you ever had a party at Farrell's in the 1970s, congratulations, you peaked early. Walking into Farrell's ice cream parlor felt like entering a cartoon version of the turn-of-the-century soda shop. Striped vests, bow ties, old-timey music, and a menu filled with wild desserts that were taller than your little brother. It was chaos with sprinkles. This was the kind of place that turned Sundays into stadium events and made sugar feel like a celebration. And then there was the zoo, a ridiculous, absurd, absolutely brilliant monstrosity of a Sunday. Carried out by multiple employees running through the restaurant while banging a drum and screaming, "Zoo! Zoo! Zoo!" It was basically a declaration of war on restraint. And the kids? They were eating it up, literally and figuratively. But underneath all the whipped cream and pageantry was a place that really understood family fun. You were not just ordering dessert. You were making a memory. The chaos, the clatter, the calorie overload, it was part of the magic. You did not come to Farrell's for peace and quiet. You came for a food parade, a sugar rush, and a place where the adults sighed while the kids bounced in their seats. It was the ultimate yes place in a world full of no. There is something about a root beer float that feels like summer. But when you had one served in a frosty mug at an A&W drive-in, it hit different. This was not a rushed soda from a plastic bottle. This was root beer as an experience. Car hops on roller skates, trays clipped to your window, and that perfect mix of ice cream and fizz. It was Americana in a glass. In the 1970s, drive-in dining was still alive and kicking. And A&W was at the heart of it. Families packed into cars, kids crammed into back seats, and there was this weird, wonderful thrill about eating full meals without leaving your vehicle. You were in your own little booth on wheels, and the star of that menu was always the float. That thick foam, that creamy scoop slowly melting into sweet carbonation. You did not sip it. You savored it. You poked at it with your straw. You took a spoon to it when the bubbles died down. It was simple, delicious, and a reminder that not everything needed to be complicated to feel special. The food was classic drive-in fare, burgers, hot dogs, crinkle-cut fries, but it was the root beer that made the place unforgettable. Cold, rich, and served in chilled glass mugs that clinked like they meant business. No paper cups here. Just the real thing, sweating with condensation under the summer sun. It was not fast food. It was drive-in dining with personality. And in a decade where sitting down often meant sitting inside, A&W gave people a reason to roll down their windows and enjoy a meal under the open sky. Before the controversy caught up with it, Sambo's was everywhere. And for a time in the 1970s, it was one of the biggest names in breakfast. Open early, often late, and always ready with a stack of pancakes dripping in syrup. It was the kind of place families stopped at on the way to road trips or for Saturday mornings that started a little too early. The vibe was laid back, kid-friendly, and comfortable. Bright booths, illustrated menus, and pancakes that somehow tasted better when eaten with plastic syrup containers shaped like bears. The food was affordable, the service was fast, and the portions were just shy of excessive, which is exactly what breakfast lovers wanted. Their branding leaned hard on storytelling, and while the original theme is undeniably problematic today, it reflected a different time when restaurants leaned into mascots and backstories to create an identity. But for a lot of kids back then, it was just the place where they got chocolate chip pancakes and a chocolate milk with a swirly straw. And the thing is, the food held its own. The pancakes were genuinely good. The eggs were reliable. The hash browns were crispy, and the coffee was hot, which is all anyone really asks of a breakfast joint. At its peak, Sambo's was not just a restaurant. It was part of the morning routine for countless families, the kind of place you returned to because it felt like a tradition. And while its legacy is a complicated one, there is no denying that for a few years in the 1970s, Sambo's helped define what going out for breakfast looked like across America. You could spot the big boy statue from the parking lot, that grinning kid holding up a cheeseburger like it was the crown jewel of America. And in the 1970s, he really was. Big boy restaurants were warm, welcoming, and wrapped in that all-important family vibe. Cozy booths, laminated menus, and milkshakes that showed up tall and frosty. This was classic diner comfort. Big Boy served everything. Seriously, everything. Burgers, meatloaf, pancakes, fried fish, pie, spaghetti. It was the Swiss Army knife of chain dining. No matter who you came with, a picky kid, a meat and potatoes dad, or a grandma who just wanted soup, everyone found something they liked. But the star was the Big Boy combo. A double-decker cheeseburger with that signature sauce that somehow tasted exactly the same in every state. And that was the magic. No matter where you were, a Big Boy meal felt familiar. The restaurants themselves felt like home away from home. Staff who remembered your name, booths you sank into, and that little paper placemat you always ended up doodling on while you waited. It was not fancy, but it was ours. And let us not forget the desserts. Hot fudge cake, banana splits, pies that came in rotating displays. They always had something sweet waiting at the end. Big Boy was not trying to reinvent the wheel. It just made sure everyone in the car left full and happy. In a time before foodie culture and Instagram menus, Big Boy reminded people that a good meal did not have to be complicated. Just warm, filling, and shared with the ones you love. If the 1970s were about loosening up a bit, Bennigan's was the restaurant that caught the vibe. It came in late in the decade, but it wasted no time making a name for itself. Dark wood paneling, green leather booths, Irish pub decor. It had that just enough edge feel to stand out from the family-focused chains. It was not fine dining. It was fun dining. A place where you could grab a beer, order a Monte Cristo sandwich the size of your head, and still bring your kids along for a basket of chicken tenders. Bennigan's knew its lane and drove at full speed. And about that Monte Cristo, deep-fried powdered sugar on top with raspberry jam on the side. It should not have worked. It definitely should not have worked. But somehow, it became their signature dish. Sweet, salty, fried, and just weird enough to keep people talking. Bennigan's also helped bridge that gap between bar food and restaurant food. You could get nachos and onion rings, or a steak and salad, all under one roof. And if you stayed long enough, you might hear the music turn up a little or catch a game on the television in the corner. This was where first dates happened, where coworkers grabbed a drink after clocking out, where birthday dinners and casual Fridays blurred into one. It was pub style done American style, big, bold, and with extra ranch dressing. Bennigan's carved out a place for people who wanted more than fast food, but less than fine dining. And for a lot of us, that middle ground hit just right. There was a time when Burger Chef was everywhere. We are talking thousands of locations, second only to McDonald's. It had that red, white, and blue branding, a fun cartoon mascot, and the kind of meals kids begged for after school. And yet, somehow, it all vanished. Not with a bang, but with a slow, silent collapse. Burger Chef was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. They invented the kids' meal before anyone else, complete with toys and comic book menus. They had the Works Bar, a build-your-own burger station that felt revolutionary back then. People genuinely liked the food. The burgers were solid, the fries had their fans, and the milkshakes were thick enough to bend a spoon. But then the cracks started showing. Management decisions got messy. Franchises started pulling in different directions. While McDonald's was streamlining and branding like crazy, Burger Chef felt stuck in place. They expanded too fast, tried too many new things at once, and lost the clear identity that made them special in the first place. By the late 1970s, competition was fierce, and Burger Chef just could not keep up. Some stores quietly rebranded. Others shut down completely. A few were bought out by Hardee's. And just like that, a name that once stood tall across the country faded into trivia night territory. People still remember those fun meals and commercials, but the chain itself? Gone. A reminder that being first does not mean you win, especially if you do not adapt. Burger Chef had the recipe. They just lost the kitchen. There is weird. Then there is steaming hot dogs and beer weird. That was the calling card of Lum's, a restaurant chain that bet big on novelty and came up short. In theory, it sounded just quirky enough to work. A hot dog, simmered in beer, topped with your favorite fixings, served up in a cozy diner-style setting. But in practice? Well, let us just say no one was rushing home to recreate it. Lum's was born in the 1950s, but it hit its stride in the 1970s. The vibe was somewhere between casual diner and chain experiment. They had chili dogs, sandwiches, roast beef platters, and of course that beer-steamed dog. It was supposed to be the thing that made them different. And it was. Just not in the way they hoped. People were not quite sure what to make of it. The beer flavor was subtle at best, odd at worst, and because the beer was fully cooked off, it had zero buzz and all the funk. Combine that with uneven quality across locations and a menu that never quite settled into a rhythm, and Lum's started losing its charm. Even the fact that Milton Berle did commercials for them could not save it. Ownership changed hands, concepts were shuffled, And eventually, most locations either closed or were turned into something else entirely. Lum's had heart. It had personality. But personality does not always translate into staying power, especially when your signature dish confuses more people than it impresses. A beer-steamed hot dog might grab attention once, but it takes more than a gimmick to keep the grill hot. You would think that when a football star opens a burger chain, it would be a touchdown. And for a while, Geno's Hamburgers looked like a winner. Founded by Baltimore Colts legend Geno Marchetti, it had instant name recognition, a loyal fan base, and some solid East Coast swagger. But celebrity status can only carry you so far, especially when you are playing against giants. Geno's had all the right parts on paper: burgers, fried chicken, milkshakes, the usual roster. Their stores had a sporty vibe, and if you were a football fan in the 1970s, the name alone made you curious. Plus, they had a partnership with Kentucky Fried Chicken, so you could grab a burger and a bucket in one stop. That was a big deal. But the brand never quite figured out what it wanted to be. Was it a burger joint? A chicken spot? A sports bar in disguise? The identity crisis started catching up. While McDonald's and Burger King were dialing in on consistency and speed, Geno's felt like it was still running practice drills. Then came the expansion. Fast, ambitious, and maybe too much too soon. Locations started underperforming, competitors got savvier. And by the 1980s, the chain had lost its momentum. Most locations were sold off or rebranded into Roy Rogers restaurants. Today, Geno's is more of a memory, a nostalgic nod for people in certain regions who remember grabbing fries after a high school game. It had spirit, but spirit does not always translate into strategy. In the end, being a football hero did not guarantee a win in the restaurant world. It started with a catchphrase, "Howdy," and a dream to sell Southern fried chicken with country music flair. Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken was supposed to be the next big thing, with the backing of the famous Grand Ole Opry star herself, but behind the folksy branding was a mess of corporate overreach, bad planning, and one of the biggest busts in fast food history. The chain exploded practically overnight in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Dozens of franchises were sold before the first location even had time to break even. Investors saw dollar signs. Fans of country music thought it sounded charming. And on paper, it should have worked. Southern cooking, fried chicken, recognizable branding. What could go wrong? Well, a lot. The chicken itself was wildly inconsistent. Some locations had juicy, crispy birds. Others served up dry, bland meat that would make Colonel Sanders cry. The real problem, though, was in the books. Poor financial oversight, inflated stock values, and a business model built more on hype than actual product. As soon as the financial reality hit, things unraveled fast. Lawsuits followed, franchises closed, and the dream of a country fried empire went cold before it even had time to settle into the fryer. Minnie Pearl herself had little to do with the chain's day-to-day operations, but her name was forever attached to its downfall. It became a cautionary tale, proof that you cannot build a restaurant brand on personality alone. Fried chicken can be comfort food, but in this case, it became corporate chaos with a Southern twang. Roast beef sandwiches can be great, warm, savory, just the right amount of messy. And for a while, Rax was doing a decent job delivering exactly that. But somewhere along the way, it decided to stop being Rax and start being, well, everything else. Jungle themes, salad bars, and a half-hearted attempt to take on Arby's. Spoiler alert, it did not end well. Rax started out strong in the 1970s. It was simple, focused, and had a loyal base. The roast beef was hot, the buns were soft, and the prices were reasonable. People liked it. They did not love it, but they liked it, which is more than you can say for most chains that came and went. Then came the identity crisis. The company tried to reinvent itself into a fast casual experience before that was even a buzzword. Suddenly, locations had ferns, waterfalls, and salad bars. Yes, actual salad bars, with the weirdest mix of items. Some stores even looked like tropical lobbies. People were confused. Was this a roast beef joint or a botanical garden? Worse, the core food started slipping. Quality dipped, menus expanded with no real strategy. The brand lost focus and the customers followed suit. By the time they tried to pivot back to basics, it was already too late. Arby's stayed the course. Rax took a detour into weird and never found the exit. You can still find a few locations here and there, mostly out of nostalgia. But for the most part, Rax became a footnote, a reminder that trying to be everything usually means ending up as nothing. Roast beef deserved better. So did we. Now technically, Kenny Rogers Roasters did not take off until the 1990s, but its roots were planted much earlier, and that is where the story gets interesting. Back in the 1970s, there were already whispers of bringing home-style roasted chicken into the fast food space. But the timing? Office way off. People in the 70s were not exactly racing toward health-conscious choices. Fried chicken ruled. Burgers were booming. Salads were more of a garnish than a main event. So, the idea of wood-fired rotisserie chicken, slow-roasted sides, and low-grease meals just did not click. It was a decade too soon for that kind of thinking. And even though Kenny Rogers himself was a megastar, Grammy winner, chart topper, absolute icon, not even his name could have carried a concept like that in the age of milkshakes and deep fryers. Roasters stayed more of a loose concept through the 70s and 80s, not really finding its legs until health food finally entered the mainstream. When the chain finally launched in the 90s, it got some traction. People liked the rotisserie vibe. It even got its own Seinfeld episode. But its foundation, that slower, gentler approach to fast food, never really meshed with the hustle of the drive-thru culture that had already taken over 2 decades earlier. By then, it was always playing catch-up. A good idea, born in the wrong decade and never quite able to roast its way into legend. You would think a place called Puppin' Taco would at least make you curious. And in the 1970s, it definitely did. The name alone was a conversation starter. But after that first chuckle, most people were left wondering what exactly they were eating. Hot dogs and tacos? Together? It was the kind of mashup that felt more like a dare than a dinner. To be fair, Puppin' Taco was not terrible. The food was fine, it was cheap, fast, and came in bright paper wrappers that smelled like salt and chili powder. The hot dogs had snap, the tacos had crunch, and if you were lucky, you could get both in one sitting and still have change in your pocket. But the real issue? It lacked identity. Was it Mexican food, American fast food, a snack bar? It could never quite figure it out. People want new, sure, but they also want clarity. Puppin' Taco offered a little too much confusion and not enough confidence. The branding was kitschy, the locations were small, and while it found some regional success, mostly in California, it never managed to stretch nationwide. Competitors with clearer menus and more focused concepts quickly edged it out. Eventually, Taco Bell bought up most of the locations, and the name faded into the kind of trivia you drop at a dinner party. Puppin' Taco was a quirky pit stop in fast food history. Charming, yes, but never built to last. Once upon a time, Schrafft's was the place to be. Polished silverware, waitresses in crisp uniforms, and menus with elegant script. It was high-end dining for the everyday person, a little treat, a step up from the usual. But by the time the 1970s rolled around, that old-school glamour had started to feel, well, old. Schrafft's was famous for its desserts, sure, but it also had charm, chandeliers, tablecloths, and a vibe that made you want to mind your manners. The food leaned classic. Turkey dinners, creamed spinach, and lemon meringue pie served with pride. For decades, it catered mostly to women, shoppers, lunch dates, special occasions. And it worked. But the world changed. Fast food was rising. Counter service was in. Schrafft's stayed stuck in the past, clinging to formality while the rest of the dining scene loosened its tie. Younger diners saw it as their grandmother's restaurant. Older customers stopped going out as often. The customer base aged, and the company never adapted. Even when Schrafft's tried to modernize, adding lounges, slimming menus, simplifying service, it felt too little, too late. The essence of the brand had already slipped away, One by one, locations closed. And soon, all that remained was a faded memory of chocolate sundaes in chilled glass cups and servers who called you ma'am. Schrafft's did not fail because it was bad. It failed because it stood still while everyone else kept walking. Zantigo had the right idea at the wrong time. Launched during the rise of fast Mexican food in the United States, it hoped to bring something slightly more authentic, a little less drive-through, and a bit more taqueria. And for a while it worked. People loved the rich sauces, the bold flavors, and the chili cheese burrito that had a cult following before that was even a thing. But then came Taco Bell. Taco Bell was faster, cheaper, and already 10 steps ahead in expansion. While Zantigo focused on food quality, Taco Bell doubled down on scale. By the time Zantigo could blink, the market was already saturated, and the little chain with big flavor could not compete with the monster brand it was up against. To make matters worse, Zantigo's branding was all over the place. Was it casual dining, fast food, fiesta-themed, formal? You could walk into one location and feel like you were at a sit-down restaurant, then hit another and find yourself eating from a counter with plastic forks. Customers were not sure what to expect, and that inconsistency made it easy to move on. Eventually, Taco Bell bought out many of the Zantigo locations, folded the brand, and turned off the lights. Some of the recipes, like the legendary chili cheese burrito, lived on in secret, buried inside other menus. Zantigo was not a bad restaurant. It was just outnumbered, outpaced, and outbranded. At one point, Henry's Hamburgers had more locations than McDonald's. Let that sink in. It was fast, cheap, and everywhere. The hook? A meal for a nickel. Simple, brilliant, but also impossible to sustain. What looked like a runaway hit in the 1950s and 1960s started unraveling by the time the 1970s arrived. Henry's was built for volume, tiny margins, huge crowds. The stores were designed to churn out burgers and fries like clockwork. And in the beginning, that worked. But as consumer tastes changed and competitors got smarter, Henry's stuck to its old playbook. They expanded too fast. Management struggled to keep control. Franchises popped up without strong support, and quality dropped. Meanwhile, places like McDonald's and Burger King were upgrading their menus, redesigning interiors, and investing in marketing. Henry's kept handing out the same paper hats and praying people would not notice the dry patties. By the mid-1970s, it was clear Henry's had hit its ceiling. Locations began to disappear. Some became independent diners, others were bought out entirely. And eventually, the name was gone from most cities, a shadow of what could have been the king of fast food. In the end, Henry's taught the industry a harsh lesson. Speed and price are not enough. You need vision, consistency, and a plan that looks 5 years ahead, not 5 seconds. A nickel might get attention, but it won't build an empire. Some nights, it was the backyard. Other times, it was the town planetarium where the air smelled like metal seats and carpet glue. But either way, Dad made sure you always looked up. He would point at a blinking light in the sky and say something like, "That one's Venus," even if it was just an airplane. You believed him, because he said it with the same certainty he used when fixing the lawnmower. Sometimes he would bring out a telescope that never quite focused right, but it did not matter. You could see the moon, or at least a very bright blur that had to be the moon, and that was enough. He told you about constellations, meteor showers, and a comet he swore he saw when he was 12. The planetarium nights were just as magical. You would lean back in those creaky seats while the ceiling lit up with galaxies and a deep voice narrated the birth of stars. Dad would whisper facts like he had a PhD in astronomy, even if he probably read them from the brochure 5 minutes before. You did not go to learn. You went to dream. And the only thing better than dreaming about space? Digging through the universe of stuff at the local flea market the very next weekend. Chi-Chi's Mexican restaurant had flair, flavor, and just enough kitsch to keep things fun. Walking into a Chi-Chi's felt like stepping onto a movie set version of Mexico, complete with bright red tiles, sombreros nailed to the wall, and waiters who carried sizzling skillets like Olympic torches. The fajitas were the main event, steaming, crackling, and guaranteed to turn every head in the room as they passed by. Kids were wide-eyed, adults were impressed, and no matter how full you were, you always had room for that one thing, the legendary fried ice cream. Coated in a crispy cinnamon shell and served in a puff of whipped cream, it was the victory lap to every meal. Chi-Chi's was the place for birthday dinners, first dates, and family outings that felt like adventures. But food safety scandals and a changing dining scene meant it all unraveled. One by one, the doors shut, the sombreros came down, and a little bit of spice left the suburbs. But not all chains faded because of scandals. Some were just too different for their own good. Stuart and Clifford Pearlman became famous for something that no amount of forewarning can prepare you for, so I'm just going to say it outright. They came up with this place called Lums, and Lums was the boss at serving hot dogs steamed in beer. Yes, you heard that exactly correct. They would serve hot dogs that had been doused and steamed in beer, and it actually was heavenly. Lums was supposed to be a hot dog stand that was family-focused, but it eventually expanded its own menu to include other things too, such as fried seafood dishes like fried prawns and shrimp and burgers. Lums was one of the last few places with a vibe that was considered vintage and retro back then, though the time period we're talking about is what we consider that to be now. This is because the atmosphere of most of its locations actually just felt like an old-school tavern, and that attracted a lot of folk. Despite starting towards the end of the 1950s, it actually had an exponential growth rate. Lums ended up having more than 500 locations nationwide, and it was one of the first places that played around with the idea of experimental food attracting diners who were looking for something new that they couldn't get anywhere else. The local train tracks were not on any map of attractions, but they might as well have been your Saturday headquarters. Dad would pull up to that familiar patch of gravel beside the crossing, engine off, thermos in hand. Steam curled from the lid as he poured black coffee like he was settling in for a movie. You sat on the hood, knees pulled up, eyes scanning the horizon. Then, clack, clack, clack. The first rumbles came. A distant whistle echoed across the fields, and the train rolled in, all muscle and thunder. Dad would nod like he timed it himself, and the counting began. 1, 2, 3. Boxcar after boxcar, faded logos, rust streaks, some tagged with graffiti from cities you had never seen. Sometimes you brought a notebook, sometimes just your eyes, but you always left with the same question. Where were they all going? Dad would lean back against the car, sip his coffee, and tell you a story that may or may not have been true. It did not matter. What mattered was the rhythm, the waiting, the wonder. And if you were lucky, the next stop was just as legendary, a miniature golf course where no obstacle was regulation, and every putt told a story. The ground round was chaos, comfort, and childhood all wrapped into one. It was the kind of place where parents could get a beer and a burger while their kids threw peanut shells on the ground like it was encouraged, because it was. The floors were covered in crunchy peanut bits. The air was filled with laughter and the faint smell of popcorn. There were projectors running old cartoons on the wall and kids with balloons trailing behind them like little parade floats. It was loud, it was joyful, and best of all, it felt like no one was trying to rush you out. The ground round leaned into its identity, part sports bar, part family funhouse. There was even a time when the cost of your meal was based on your weight. No, seriously, it was all part of the strange charm that kept people coming back. But as dining trends shifted and the novelty faded, so did the chain. Still, if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the crunch of a peanut shell underfoot. But if you were more into burgers and football than cartoons and chaos, our next place might have been your regular haunt. White Tower was a fast food chain that was founded in 1926, and it copied what was known as White Castle, which was another big name in the burger-making industry. They were known for these small white burgers, and they expanded heavily throughout the 20s and 30s. What they were known for most was that lightning-quick service. I mean, seriously, I don't know what the hourly rate was back then for the service industry, but theirs must have been the best in the market, or at least pretty competitive, since those workers did their job like men possessed. You ever seen somebody move like Sonic the Hedgehog flipping hamburgers? A marathon, sure, but hamburgers? It's insane how different the work ethic used to be back then. Well, at least you could get paid fairly, so that's something. White Tower was known for having pretty good employee retention too, and it was one of the first chains to do a lot of things besides just set a standard in how you should treat your employees. It was extremely recognizable. Remember how I just talked about how Bob's Big Boy had its own air and personality that made it stand out? White Tower was really similar to that in that regard, and that's why no matter what the location was, it was always easily recognizable. Although maybe it was a bit too easy on the eyes, because people eventually compared it to another fast food chain, White Castle, and it even got into legal battles with them over how similar their product and architecture were. Guess you always should change up the homework you copy a bit more to be on the safe side, right? The county auction barn was chaotic, dusty, and loud, and Dad loved every minute of it. From the second you stepped inside, it was a sensory overload. Wooden pens clucked with chickens, bleated with goats, and somewhere a sheep was loudly objecting to something. The auctioneer stood on a platform, voice rising and falling like a song only locals understood. He had his bidding number tucked into his shirt pocket and a mental budget that always magically doubled if the right box came along. There were tables of mystery items, rusty tools, mismatched Tupperware, bundles of wire, and once a broken vending machine that Dad swore he could fix. $10? That's a steal, he would whisper, just before being outbid by the same guy who always bid too high. You did not win much. But when Dad did walk out with something, it was like he had climbed Everest. And even when he lost, he laughed all the way home. The auction was not about getting stuff, it was about the thrill. But when he wanted a guaranteed win, all he needed was a firehouse griddle, a bottle of syrup, and a pancake breakfast made by heroes. Clancy's Hamburgers was not flashy, but that was exactly the point. This Midwestern chain was a tribute to the good old days. Think 1950s diner vibes with a 1980s sensibility. Red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and jukeboxes that never worked quite right. The menu was simple: hamburgers, fries, shakes, and maybe a tenderloin sandwich if you were feeling wild. But the flavor? Solid, dependable. The kind of burger that made you feel like everything was going to be just fine, even if you still had homework due. Clancy's peaked during the Reagan era, when families were looking for a bit of nostalgia with their ketchup. The chain kept it local, tight, and grounded, mostly popping up in Indiana and surrounding states. While national giants expanded aggressively, Clancy's stayed close to home. That was part of its charm, and maybe part of its downfall. Eventually, as tastes shifted and bigger players took over the burger scene, Clancy's began to disappear. But it never truly left the hearts of the folks who grew up on its milkshakes and diner tunes. If Clancy's was the taste of Americana, our next stop had a flavor all its own. Crunchy, spicy, and bright red as a fire truck, all straight out of the streets of Los Angeles. While Burger Chef was changing the script as far as flipping hamburgers went, Howard Johnson's was making waves even earlier in the 1920s and revolutionizing how ice cream stands worked in America. It was a humble stand that started in Massachusetts, and it ended up growing into a synonym for roadside dining eventually throughout America. It became known for its family-friendly menus, which expanded far past just ice cream. When I tell you there was a Howard Johnson everywhere, please believe me, because I mean absolutely nowhere was safe from Johnson. I'm talking about interstates, every other main road, near subways, but there was one location where they were most popular, and that was highways. Their joints also had this infectiously charming appeal to them with those bright orange roofs that were so recognizable. They were one of the first places to set a standard for fast food that the rest of America would follow, and they still stuck true to their roots by serving some pretty good ice cream. Howard Johnson focused on becoming a recognizable brand that families could trust, and their entire business model was being a source of some great food even around places like the highway. It was not advertised. It was not even on a main road. Just a crooked wooden sign and a driveway that dipped behind an overgrown hedge. But if Dad tapped the wheel twice and said, Here we are, you knew it was magic. The model train store in the back of someone's garage was no bigger than a single-car stall, but inside, it felt like a kingdom. Shelves were packed to the rafters with tiny train cars, tracks, tunnels, even tiny trees with even tinier squirrels. The air smelled like dust and old metal, the kind of smell that never leaves your coat. You would lean in to watch the train circle a miniature mountain range while Dad made small talk with the gray-haired man in suspenders, who clearly ran the whole operation on nothing but love and nostalgia. "This one's from 1952, the man would say, handing Dad a coal car like it was a rare coin. You did not know what made it special. You just knew Dad's eyes lit up in that way he saved for fishing trips and baseball games. It was not just a store. It was a secret clubhouse for grown men who still believed in toy engines and pretend towns. And if you think that was charming, wait until you smell what comes next. Free popcorn at the furniture store." The oddball roadside museum was where logic went to take a nap. You saw the hand-painted sign from the highway. "Come see the world's largest pencil," or "America's first toaster still works." Dad would swerve into the gravel lot like it was destiny. Admission was cheap, $3 cash only, and worth every penny. The inside was a fever dream. Display cases filled with bottle caps from all 50 states. A whole wall dedicated to vintage shampoo bottles. A two-headed taxidermy calf that haunted your dreams for a week. "You brought the kid today, huh?" he would say, as if Dad came here weekly. You followed them through rooms of strange collections while Dad laughed and read every single placard out loud. It was like watching a kid in a candy store, only the candy was lawn darts, Pez dispensers, and World War II ration kits. "Now this," Dad would say, holding up a glass jar with something floating in it. "This is history." And even though you rolled your eyes, part of you agreed. But if you really want to feel history in motion, just wait until you join him by the old train tracks, watching boxcars roll by, counting like your life depended on it. VIP's ended up being a chain of diner-style restaurants that was based in the Pacific Northwest, and it was founded in 1968 in Oregon. VIP's served ranges of classic American staples, which made it real popular with the middle-aged crowd that was slowly fading away into their twilight years. Burgers, beers, breakfast items, sandwiches. It was known for being family-friendly, which I'm sure you can tell a lot of these places were by now. That was just what the market was like. The biggest money was to be made with families, and a lot of diner restaurants focused on them. Also, because catering to families meant that one person could bring along 3 others with them if they suggested your spot as an idea, as compared to fast food places that would have menus better enjoyed on your own. It also followed in the footsteps of Wags, being one of the first players that were a part of the wave of 24-hour-style diner restaurants. Later on, VIP would be acquired by Denny's, but even on its own, it became a regional hit in the Northwest as a lot of people could rely on it for consistent quality, affordable meals, and an atmosphere that was perfect for a relaxing night out on the town with your wife and kids. VIP's ended up being a chain of diner-style restaurants that was based in the Pacific Northwest, and it was founded in 1968 in Oregon. VIP's served ranges of classic American staples, which made it real popular with the middle-aged crowd that was slowly fading away into their twilight years. Burgers, beers, breakfast items, sandwiches. It was known for being family-friendly, which I'm sure you can tell a lot of these places were by now. That was just what the market was like. The biggest money was to be made with families, and a lot of diner restaurants focused on them. Also, because catering to families meant that one person could bring along 3 others with them if they suggested your spot as an idea, as compared to fast food places that would have menus better enjoyed on your own. It also followed in the footsteps of Wags, being one of the first players that were a part of the wave of 24-hour-style diner restaurants. Later on, VIP would be acquired by Denny's, but even on its own, it became a regional hit in the Northwest as a lot of people could rely on it for consistent quality, affordable meals, and an atmosphere that was perfect for a relaxing night out on the town with your wife and kids. Showbiz Pizza Place was not just a restaurant. It was a fever dream brought to life with animatronic bears and arcade buzz. Long before Chuck E. Cheese swallowed up the scene, this was the spot. The neon lights outside promised an escape, but it was what happened inside that hooked you. Giant pizza pies that could feed a birthday party army, tokens clinking in your pockets, and the legendary Rock-afire Explosion Band performing on that rickety stage like your childhood depended on it. There was something surreal about watching a gorilla with sunglasses belt out pop songs while you crunched into a slice as thick as a school textbook. It was loud, it was messy, it was unforgettable. And then one day, just like that, it was gone. Bought out, rebranded, stripped of its charm. But the echoes of that mechanical bear band, they live rent-free in your brain. Of course, not every 1980s night out involved animatronic animals. Some of them felt more like date night, especially if you ended up here next. Pup and Taco was a pretty wonderful place if you were an avid taco lover, and I gotta say, there wasn't as much of that as there should have been in 1956. Hot dogs, tacos, and a variety of flavored slushies meant that it captured a lot of Mexican fans. They were always looking for places that did an authentic mean taco anyway, and now they had found one. Plus, the entire menu was kind of a brave mix of Mexican-style cooking and spices and American comfort foods, which was an idea that wasn't really being explored too much by other places yet. The hybrid menu was one of the first concepts that mixed cuisines like that, and it would become a popular staple format that other places like Del Taco would end up following too. The items were affordable, simple, and varied, which were the keys to making a good fast food place back then anyway. It was meant to be aimed at a younger audience, preferably adults in their 20s who wouldn't have the budget for fancy dining or proper full-course meals but still wanted a bite they could really feel deep in their bones. There was no intention to buy anything, and everyone knew it. The furniture store with the free popcorn machine was Dad's idea of a Saturday outing. You would walk in and get hit with that smell, leather, fresh carpet, and hot butter. Dad would head straight for the recliners, and you? Straight to the red and silver popcorn machine near the back. It was always humming, full of those little white bags that were supposed to be single-serve, but somehow you found a way to go back 5 times without getting caught. Meanwhile, Dad was doing his test sit. That meant stretching, sighing, and rocking the recliner back and forth like he was making a real decision. "Too stiff," he would say. "This one's a back killer." The sales guy always came over and Dad would nod along, arms crossed, like he was closing in on the deal of the century. But you knew he was not buying a couch, he just liked the idea of picking one. And that popcorn? It was better than movie theater popcorn because it was earned. All this to say, shopping never felt like shopping with Dad. It felt like a game. But speaking of buttons, lights, and games, let me tell you about the kind of place where Dad's inner nerd really came to life. Burger Queen Druthers was also known for its mascot, Queenie Bee, and a really simple and affordable menu that was burgers, chicken, and milkshakes. You might be wondering why the name is split into 2 though, and, well, they used to be known as Burger Queen, but they changed their name to Druthers eventually. It was an attempt to set itself apart, and it also worked with their new slogan in the 1980s, which was, "I'd rather go to Druthers." Yeah, I can safely say their shakes and burgers were worth your money, but that pun game really needs work. Anyway, they would eventually expand their menu far past items like basic burgers and would include fish sandwiches and fired chicken, which helped boost its popularity enough to give local fast food chains some competition. It unfortunately couldn't keep up with other competitors that were big enough to have a nationwide presence, and the constant attempts at refreshing its image meant that it lost a sense of identity, ironically enough. However, what it did show a lot of other businesses in America was the idea of expanding your menu to include more varied items. This is something places would try to adopt a lot because they saw how it helped Druthers keep up with local competition, so it became a go-to idea for startups and up-and-coming fast food joints. Pioneer Chicken was not just food, it was a vibe. An LA staple with an orange and red glow that felt like it came from another world. The fried chicken here was unlike anything else. Its signature reddish-brown coating almost looked radioactive, but once you bit into that ultra-crispy skin, you got it. tender chicken inside, wild crunch on the outside, and just enough seasoning to make you reach for a napkin between bites. People loved Pioneer because it was loud, bold, and unapologetically messy. And if you were anywhere near Los Angeles during the 1980s, you could not miss it. With Dodgers memorabilia on the walls and that blazing neon signage out front, it was practically a sports bar disguised as a fast food joint. It was the kind of place you hit up after a game, or on a late-night fried chicken run with your cousins. Eventually, though, the fried chicken wars heated up, and Pioneer could not keep up. Locations closed, memories faded, and only a few die-hard fans kept the dream alive. But once you have tasted that crunch, it stays with you. Speaking of flavor bombs, let us head to a place that steamed their hot dogs and beer and served tiki cocktails next to vinyl booths, an odd pairing that somehow made perfect sense. The Burger Chef was definitely like that. It wasn't even that long ago that it was formed, sort of. Do you think 70 years is long? It was in 1954 in Indianapolis, Indiana, where Burger Chef was first founded, and it was by the 1960s that it grew to rival McDonald's, the only competitor left in America that was still bigger than it. It had over 1,000 locations, and it was the first fast food joint to introduce things like the Fun Meal, which was a pretty draft version of what would go on to be the kids' meal format that a lot of places would adopt. Actually, it wouldn't just inspire that. It even gave McDonald's a heads up and gave them the idea to whip up the Happy Meal and tap into all that unexplored kids' menu market. It didn't last that long. Burger Chef ended up being sold off by its owners in the mid-1980s, so it was only around for some 30-odd years. Even in that little amount of time, it managed to completely change fast food as we know it. The all-you-can-fit junkyard was not a store. It was a scavenger hunt with tetanus on the side. Dad would wear his work pants, which meant they had oil stains older than you were, and he would grab a wrench like he was Indiana Jones about to head into the temple. The guy at the front desk waved him through like an old friend. "Take whatever you can carry," he said, and Dad took that as a challenge. Rows and rows of sun-bleached cars with their guts spilled out, broken washing machines, and lawn mowers that had definitely seen war. Dad would pop a hood, grunt like he found treasure, and climb inside the thing like he was becoming one with it. Meanwhile, you were busy poking through the wreckage and came across something unforgettable, an actual raccoon skull. No idea how it got there. You just knew it was going in your backpack. At some point, Dad would emerge, sweaty and victorious, holding a car mirror or some hose that just needed a clean. It was less about the parts and more about the hunt. And when the sun started setting and he said, "We've got time for one more stop," you hoped it would be the fishing hole, the one no one else knew about. Lums was born from a hot dog stand and became something like a fever dream of mid-century Americana meets tiki bar chic. Founded in Miami, this oddball restaurant chain made a name for itself with its signature beer-steamed hot dogs. Yes, beer-steamed. It sounds weird until you try it. The result was a hot dog with just a hint of hoppy goodness, nestled in a bun that soaked it all up like a sponge. But Lums was more than just its dogs. It had fried clams, tiki drinks, and decor that made you feel like you had wandered into a vacation. Palm fronds, bamboo, and plastic parrots set the tone. The vibe was easygoing, slightly eccentric, and always a little bit boozy, even if you were just there for the onion rings. At its peak, Lums had hundreds of locations, including one right on the Las Vegas Strip. But as the 80s rolled on, the novelty wore off and the chain dwindled. Still, if you ever sat down at Lums with a giant menu, a plate of clams, and a tall frosty mug, you know it had a strange magic. But if Lums was all about weird combinations, the next place made celebrations the main course, with parades, sirens, and a dessert so big they dared you to finish it. The community swap meet in the church parking lot was a patchwork quilt of folding tables, lawn chairs, and a whole lot of neighborhood hustle. It was always held early, way too early, and Dad would pull up with a thermos of coffee and a plan. This was not a place for big spenders. This was a battlefield of bartering. He would go straight to the tables stacked with transistor radios, old tools, and that mysterious plastic bin full of tangled cords that might be useful someday. You You were eyeing the table with the mismatched action figures and board games missing all the pieces. There was always one guy who sold nothing but Velvet Elvis paintings. No one ever saw him set up or pack up. He was just there. The swap meet had its regulars. The Tupperware lady with 1,000 lids and no matching containers. The comic guy who only sold back issues from 1974. And the woman with jars of jelly that looked more suspicious than sweet. But Dad? He moved through it all like a seasoned pro, chatting with everyone like they were old buddies, walking away with something bizarre like a minifan or a set of ceramic pigs, and when he said, "Let's stop by the junkyard real quick," you knew things were about to get even stranger. Got a favorite or a food fail? Tell us in the comments, tap like if you smiled, and subscribe for more bites of nostalgia.